What I'm about to share with you are 6 of the most disturbing true crime cases that happened when people were home alone. These aren't urban legends or made-up stories. These are real cases where being alone at home turned into absolute horror. Before we start, I need to warn you that these stories contain graphic descriptions of violence, murder, and home invasions. If that's not something you can handle, stop watching now. For everyone else, let's dive into these home alone horror stories. Our first story takes us to Cheshire, Connecticut in July 2007 and involves one of the most horrific home invasion cases in modern American history. The Pettit family lived in a beautiful colonial house on Sorghum Mill Drive in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. Dr. William Pettit was a prominent endocrinologist who ran a diabetes clinic. His wife, Jennifer Hawk Pettit, was a nurse and active in their church. They had 2 daughters, 17-year-old Haley and 11-year-old Michaela. The Pettits were a well-liked family in the community, involved in charity work and known for their kindness. On the evening of July 22, 2007, the Pettit family returned home from a dinner at a local restaurant around 9 p.m. They'd had a nice family meal together. Dr. Pettit was tired and decided to sleep on the couch in the sunroom on the first floor. He often did this when he had early morning appointments. Jennifer and the girls went upstairs to their bedrooms. Haley went to her room on the second floor. Michaela went to her room, also on the second floor. Jennifer went to the master bedroom. Everyone settled in for the night. The house was locked. The alarm system wasn't set because Dr. Pettit was downstairs and would be coming and going. Everything seemed safe and normal. What the Pettit family didn't know was that 2 men had followed them home from the restaurant. Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky were career criminals who'd recently been released from prison. They'd seen the Pettit family at the restaurant and had noticed Jennifer was carrying a purse that looked expensive. They'd followed the family's car home to see where they lived. They'd watched the house from a distance, waiting for the lights to go out. They were planning to break in and rob the family. Around 3 a.m. on July 23rd, Stephen and Joshua crept up to the Pettit house. They tried several doors and windows and found the basement door was unlocked. They entered the house quietly through the basement. They made their way upstairs to the main floor. They found Dr. Pettit sleeping on the couch in the sunroom. Before Dr. Pettit could wake up and react, they attacked him. They hit him in the head with a baseball bat multiple times. Dr. Pettit was knocked unconscious, blood pouring from head wounds. Stephen and Joshua then tied Dr. Pettit's hands and feet with rope and dragged him down to the basement. They tied him to a pole in the basement. With Dr. Pettit secured in the basement, Stephen and Joshua went upstairs to Baseus, find the rest of the family. They found Jennifer asleep in the master bedroom. They woke her up by putting a gun to her head. Jennifer woke up terrified, not understanding what was happening. Who were these men in her bedroom? Stephen and Joshua tied Jennifer's hands and feet. They told her if she cooperated, nobody would get hurt. They just wanted money. Jennifer was crying but trying to stay calm for her daughters. Stephen and Joshua then went to Haley's room. They woke her up and tied her hands and feet. She was tied to her bed. They did the same to Michaela, tying the 11-year-old to her bed. Both girls were terrified, crying for their mother. Jennifer could hear her daughters crying from the master bedroom where she was tied up. She was begging Stephen and Joshua not to hurt her children. The men told her to shut up or they'd kill everyone. For the next several hours, Stephen and Joshua terrorized the Pettit family. They ransacked the house looking for valuables. They found jewelry, some cash, credit cards, but they wanted more. They forced Jennifer to give them her bank account information. They found out the Pettits had a significant amount of money in their Bank of America account. Stephen and Joshua decided they would force Jennifer to go to the bank in the morning and withdraw money. During these hours of captivity, unspeakable things happened. Joshua went into Michaela's room multiple times. He took photos of Michaela on his cell phone. He sexually assaulted the 11-year-old girl while she was tied to her bed. Michaela was crying and begging him to stop. Jennifer could hear her daughter's cries from the other room, but was helpless to protect her. The trauma of hearing your child being assaulted and not being able to do anything about it, it's unimaginable. Dr. Pettit was in the basement, tied to the pole. He'd regained consciousness, but was badly injured from being hit with the baseball bat. He had severe head wounds and was bleeding. He was in and out of consciousness. He could hear noises from upstairs, but didn't know exactly what was happening. He tried to work on his restraints, but they were too tight. As morning came, Stephen and Joshua decided it was time to get the money. Around 9 a.m., they forced Jennifer to get dressed. They told her they were taking her to the bank. If she did what they said and got them money, they'd leave and nobody else would get hurt. Jennifer desperately wanted to believe this was true. She agreed to cooperate. Stephen drove Jennifer to the Bank of America on Main Street in a Pettit family car. Joshua stayed at the house with the girls. At the bank, Jennifer went inside to withdraw money. She was accompanied by Stephen, who waited in the car outside, but kept his phone connected to Joshua's phone so they could communicate. The bank teller who helped Jennifer was a woman named Kristen Makzangi. Kristen noticed that Jennifer seemed extremely nervous and distressed. Jennifer was shaking as she requested to withdraw $15,000 from her account. This was an unusually large cash withdrawal and required manager approval. While waiting for the manager, Jennifer quietly told Kristen that her family was being held hostage at their home. She said 2 men had broken in during the night. She said they'd assaulted her daughter. She said the men had threatened to kill her family if she didn't get the money. She begged Kristen to call the police, but to please not make it obvious, because one of the men was watching from outside. Kristen immediately alerted her manager, and they called 911 while processing Jennifer's withdrawal. Police were dispatched to the Pettit house at 9:21 a.m. The 911 call from the bank indicated a home invasion in progress with hostages. This was treated as a critical emergency. Multiple units were sent to the area. Meanwhile, Jennifer completed her withdrawal and got $15,000 in cash. She left the bank with Stephen and they drove back to the Pettit house, arriving around 9:30 a.m. Police were setting up a perimeter around the Pettit house, but hadn't yet approached the house because it was a hostage situation. The protocol was to establish position, gather intelligence, and avoid spooking the hostage takers into violence. This decision, which followed standard procedure, would prove tragically wrong. When Stephen and Jennifer returned to the house, Stephen and Joshua now had the money they wanted. But they had a problem. They couldn't just let the family go. The Pettits had seen their faces. They knew their names had been mentioned. The police had probably been called by now. Stephen and Joshua made a decision. They were going to kill the entire family and burn down the house to destroy evidence. They started by taking Jennifer back upstairs. They tied her to the bed in the master bedroom. Then they poured gasoline all over her and around the bedroom. Jennifer realized what they were planning to do. She started begging them, "Please don't do this. Please, my daughters. Please don't hurt my daughters." Stephen and Joshua ignored her pleas. They went to Haley's room and poured gasoline on her and her bed. They did the same to Michaela. The girls were crying hysterically, calling for their mother. Stephen and Joshua went back downstairs. They poured gasoline in multiple rooms throughout the first floor. They were preparing to light the house on fire with the family inside. Meanwhile, Dr. Pettit in the basement had managed to work one of his hands partially free from the rope. He was working frantically to get loose, knowing something terrible was happening upstairs. With a final desperate effort, Dr. Pettit got his hands free. He untied his feet and looked for a way to escape. Upstairs, Stephen Hayes lit a match. He dropped it on the gasoline-soaked carpet in the living room. The gasoline ignited instantly. Flames erupted. Stephen and Joshua ran out of the house through the back door. Within seconds, the first floor of the house was engulfed in flames. The fire raced up the stairs toward the bedrooms, where Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela were tied to their beds, covered in gasoline. Dr. Pettit heard the whoosh of flames igniting. He saw smoke starting to pour into the basement. He knew the house was on fire. He found a basement window and broke it. He crawled through the window and collapsed on the lawn. He was badly injured, bleeding from his head wounds, barely able to move, but he'd escaped. He looked up at his house and saw flames in the windows. He knew his wife and daughters were still inside. He tried to get up, to go back in, but his body wouldn't respond. He was screaming for help. Police officers who were positioned around the perimeter saw Dr. Pettit crawl out of the basement window. They saw the house was on fire. They saw two men running from the back of the house. Officers moved in immediately. Some officers pursued Stephen and Joshua. Other officers rushed to the house to rescue the family. But it was too late. The fire had spread with incredible speed because of all the gasoline. The second floor where Jennifer and the girls were trapped was completely engulfed. Firefighters arrived and began fighting the blaze. But the fire was too intense. It took firefighters over an hour to get the fire under control enough to enter the house. When they finally got inside and up to the second floor bedrooms, they found the bodies of Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela. All three had died from smoke inhalation. They'd been tied to their beds and couldn't escape. They'd died knowing they were about to be burned alive. The medical examiner determined they'd actually died from the smoke before the flames reached them. But the terror of those final moments was unimaginable. Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky were both captured within minutes of fleeing the burning house. Stephen was found hiding in a parking lot just a few blocks away. Joshua was caught trying to drive away in the Pettit family's car. Both men were arrested and charged with multiple counts of capital murder, sexual assault, kidnapping, arson, and robbery. Dr. William Pettit was the sole survivor. He'd been beaten, tied up, held hostage for hours, and had to watch his house burn, knowing his family was inside. He'd sustained serious head injuries and required extensive medical treatment. But his physical injuries were nothing compared to the psychological trauma. He'd lost his entire family. His wife and both daughters had been murdered in the most horrific way possible. The trials of Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky became major news. Both trials were held separately and were televised. The evidence presented was overwhelming and disturbing. Prosecutors showed the photos Joshua had taken of Michaela on his cell phone. They presented forensic evidence from the crime scene. They presented testimony from Dr. Pettit, who had to describe the entire ordeal. They presented testimony from the bank teller who'd helped Jennifer that morning. They presented evidence showing the planning and the brutality of the crimes. Stephen Hayes went to trial first in 2010. The prosecution presented their case showing Stephen's role in the home invasion, the assault, the kidnapping, and the murders. The defense tried to argue that Joshua was the mastermind and Stephen was just following along, but the jury didn't buy it. On October 5th, 2010, Stephen Hayes was convicted on all 16 counts, including capital murder. The jury recommended the death penalty. Stephen was sentenced to death. Joshua Komisarjevsky's trial took place in 2011. The evidence against him was even more damning because of the photos he'd taken of Michaela. The jury heard testimony about how Joshua had sexually assaulted the 11-year-old girl multiple times during the home invasion. They heard about the planning, the violence, the decision to burn the house. Joshua's defense tried to argue he had a troubled childhood and mental health issues, but the jury convicted him on all counts. He was also sentenced to death. Both men are currently on death row in Connecticut. However, Connecticut abolished the death penalty in 2012, and the Connecticut Supreme Court ruled in 2015 that the death penalty was unconstitutional, even for crimes committed before abolition. This meant Stephen and Joshua's death sentences were commuted to life in prison without parole. They'll spend the rest of their lives in prison, but will never be executed. Dr. Pettit has expressed frustration with this, believing both men deserve to die for what they did to his family. Dr. William Pettit has had to rebuild his life after losing everything. He established the Pettit Family Foundation in memory of his wife and daughters. The foundation supports education and charity causes that were important to Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela. Dr. Pettit eventually remarried and has had more children. He's tried to move forward while honoring the memory of his first family. He's spoken publicly about the home invasion and about crime victims' rights. He's been an advocate for stronger penalties for violent criminals. The Cheshire home invasion shocked Connecticut and the nation. The randomness of it was terrifying. The Pettits were a normal, good family living in a safe neighborhood. They did nothing wrong. They were simply targeted by two violent criminals who decided to rob them and then murdered them to avoid being caught. The case raised questions about the parole system that had released Stephen and Joshua despite their long criminal histories. It raised questions about police response to hostage situations. It became one of the most infamous home invasion cases in American history. Now, if you're finding this content compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Let's move on to our second story. This next case takes us to Wichita, Kansas in December 2000 and involves a crime that became known as the Wichita Massacre. 5 young people were held hostage, tortured, and 4 of them were murdered in one of the most brutal crimes in Kansas history. On the evening of December 14th, 2000, 2 brothers, Reginald Carr, who was 23 years old, and Jonathan Carr, who was 20 years old, went on a crime spree in Wichita. They'd been committing robberies and carjackings throughout the evening. They were armed with guns and were extremely dangerous. Around 11 p.m., the Carr brothers drove to the Birchwood neighborhood in Wichita, a middle-class residential area. They were looking for another house to rob. They chose a house at 12727 East Birchwood Drive, more or less at random. It was a townhouse that looked nice, and they assumed the residents would have money and valuables. They had no idea who lived there. They just knew they wanted to rob them. Inside the townhouse were 5 people. There were 3 young men, Jason Beaufort, who was 26, Brad Haka, who was 27, and Aaron Sander, who was 29. There were also 2 young women, Heather Muller, who was 25, and Jason's girlfriend, and Holly Glover, who was also 25 and Aaron's girlfriend. The 5 friends had gathered at the townhouse, which Jason and Brad shared for a casual evening. They'd ordered pizza, watched movies, and were hanging out. It was a normal Friday night. Around midnight, the Carr brothers approached the townhouse. They found a sliding glass door that was unlocked and entered quietly. They made their way through the house until they found the 5 friends in the living room. The Carr brothers pulled out guns and announced this was a robbery. The 5 friends were terrified. They immediately complied, putting their hands up. The Carr brothers ordered everyone to lie face down on the floor. For the next 4 hours, the Carr brothers terrorized the 5 victims. They forced them to remove all their clothing. They demanded to know where money and valuables were kept. Jason and Brad told them where their wallets were, where they kept cash, where their ATM cards were. The Carr brothers took everything, but they wanted more. They decided to take the victims to ATM machines and force them to withdraw the maximum amount of cash. But first, the Carr brothers assaulted the 2 women. While the men were forced to watch, Reginald and Jonathan raped Heather and Holly multiple times. The women were crying and begging them to stop. The men were forced to lie there, unable to help their girlfriends, knowing if they moved, they'd be shot. The psychological torture of this was immense. The physical assault of the women was horrific. This went on for over an hour. After assaulting the women, the Carr brothers forced the 5 victims into the back of Brad's truck. They put all 5 of them beat up in the truck bed. It was December, freezing cold, and the victims were naked. The Carr brothers drove to various ATM machines around Wichita. At each ATM, they forced one of the victims to get out and withdraw the maximum amount allowed, which was usually $500. They threatened that if the victim tried to run or signal for help, they'd kill everyone. The victims complied, too terrified to do anything else. They went to multiple ATMs, and the Carr brothers collected several $1,000s. After hitting multiple ATMs, the Carr brothers had a problem. They had 5 witnesses who'd seen their faces and could identify them. They made a decision to kill all 5 victims. They drove to a remote field on the outskirts of Wichita, an area near 29th Street North and Greenwich Road. It was an empty, snow-covered field with no houses nearby. It was around 4 a.m., dark and bitterly cold. The Carr brothers ordered the 5 victims out of the truck. The victims were naked, freezing, shivering uncontrollably in the December cold. They knew what was about to happen. Heather was crying and begging for her life. Jason was trying to negotiate, offering them more money, anything. Just please don't kill us. The Carr brothers ignored the pleas. They ordered all 5 victims to kneel in a row in the snow. Then they started shooting. They shot each victim in the back of the head, execution style. Jason Beefert was shot first and fell forward into the snow. Then Brad Haka was shot and fell. Then Aaron Sander was shot. Then Heather Muller was shot. Finally, Holly Glover was shot. All 5 victims collapsed in the snow, blood spreading around them. The Carr brothers stood there for a moment, looking at the bodies. Then they ran over each body with Brad's truck to make sure they were dead. The truck tires rolled over the victims' heads and bodies. Then the Carr brothers drove away in Brad's truck, leaving the 5 bodies in the snow. They drove back to the townhouse and set it on fire to destroy evidence. Then they fled Wichita. But miraculously, Holly Glover was still alive. The bullet that hit her had struck her at an angle and hadn't penetrated her skull. It had knocked her unconscious, but hadn't killed her. The truck tire that ran over her had missed her head and rolled over her leg, breaking it. Holly regained consciousness lying in the snow next to her dead friends. She was naked, freezing, bleeding with a broken leg, but she was alive. Holly knew she had to get help. She couldn't let the men who did this get away. Despite her injuries, despite the freezing cold, Holly started crawling through the snow toward distant lights. She could see a house about a quarter-mile away. She crawled naked through the snow, leaving a trail of blood behind her. The pain was unbearable, but she kept going. After what felt like forever, Holly reached the house. She pounded on the door with her fists. The homeowners, a couple in their 60s, were woken by the pounding. When they opened the door, they found a naked, bloody woman collapsed on their porch. They immediately called 911 and brought Holly inside. They wrapped her in blankets and tried to help her. Holly told them what had happened. She described the 5 people in the field. She described the 2 men who'd attacked them. She gave police everything she could remember. Police and paramedics arrived quickly. Holly was rushed to a hospital. She was treated for hypothermia, a gunshot wound to the head, and a broken leg. Officers went to the field Holly had described. They found the 4 bodies of Jason, Brad, Aaron, and Heather. All 4 had been shot in the head and run over with the truck. They were dead. The medical examiner determined they died at the scene from the gunshot wounds and the trauma of being run over. Police also went to the townhouse on Birchwood Drive. They found it had been set on fire. Firefighters had already extinguished the blaze. The house was damaged, but investigators were able to process the scene. They found evidence of the crimes that had occurred there. They found DNA evidence that would later link to the Carr brothers. The investigation moved quickly. Holly had given detailed descriptions of the attackers. She described them as two black men, one taller and heavier, one shorter and thinner. She described what they were wearing. She described their voices and mannerisms. Police checked recent crime reports and found several robberies and carjackings from the night of December 14th that matched the Carr's pattern. Witnesses from those crimes gave similar descriptions of the suspects. Police identified the Carr brothers as suspects. They were known to police with criminal records. Officers went to places the Carrs were known to frequent. On December 30th, 2000, 16 days after the massacre, police found Jonathan Carr at his girlfriend's apartment. He was arrested without incident. Reginald Carr was arrested on January 2nd, 2001. Both brothers were charged with multiple counts of capital murder, rape, robbery, and kidnapping. The evidence against the Carr brothers was overwhelming. Holly identified them in photo lineups and later in person. DNA evidence from the rape kits matched the Carrs. The victims' AATM cards were found in the Carrs' possession. Brad's truck was found abandoned and had evidence linking it to the Carrs. Forensic evidence from the crime scenes all pointed to the Carr brothers. They were clearly guilty. The trial took place in 2002. The prosecution presented all the evidence. They called Holly Glover as their star witness. Holly had to take the stand and describe in detail everything that happened that night. She had to describe being raped. She had to describe watching her friends be murdered. She had to describe being shot and left for dead. Her testimony was powerful and devastating. The jury heard about the hours of torture the victims endured. They heard about the executions in the snow. They saw crime scene photos showing the bodies. The defense had almost nothing to work with. They tried to argue the brothers had difficult childhoods and came from poverty. They tried to get sympathy for the defendants, but the jury wasn't moved. The crimes were too heinous. On June 9th, 2002, both Reginald and Jonathan Carr were convicted on all counts. The jury unanimously recommended the death penalty for both brothers. They were sentenced to death. The Carr brothers have been on death row in Kansas since 2002. They've filed numerous appeals. In 2014, the Kansas Supreme Court overturned their death sentences on procedural grounds, saying they should have had separate penalty hearings. But in 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed that decision and reinstated the death sentences. The Carrs remain on death row, but Kansas hasn't executed anyone since 1965, so they'll likely die in prison of natural causes rather than execution. Holly Glover survived, but her life was forever changed. She had extensive physical injuries that required multiple surgeries. She had psychological trauma from the assault and from watching her friends die. She had survivor's guilt. Why did she survive when the other four didn't? Holly has largely stayed out of the public eye since the trial. She's tried to rebuild her life and move forward. She's the hero of this story, crawling through the snow to get help and then having the courage to testify and identify the men who attacked her. The families of Jason, Brad, Aaron, and Heather were devastated. These were young people in their 20s with their whole lives ahead of them. They were simply hanging out with friends on a Friday night and became victims of a random home invasion. They did nothing wrong. They were just in the wrong place when two violent criminals decided to rob that particular house. Let's move on to our third story now. This case takes us to a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, in September 2010 and involves a terrifying home invasion. Leigh Ann Barton was a 35-year-old mother of two. She lived with her husband Bobby and their two children, ages 10 and 7, in a nice suburban home in Cherokee County. Leigh Ann was a stay-at-home mom who volunteered at her kids' school. Bobby worked in finance and traveled frequently for work. On September 15, 2010, Bobby was away on a business trip. Leanne was home with the kids. They'd had a normal evening. Leanne had made dinner, helped the kids with homework, and put them to bed around 8:30 p.m. After the kids were asleep, Leanne took a bath and then went to her bedroom to read. She was in her pajamas, relaxing, thinking about nothing in particular. Everything was normal. The house was locked. The alarm system was on. Leanne felt safe. Around 10:30 p.m., Leanne heard a noise downstairs. It sounded like glass breaking. She immediately tensed up. Maybe the cat had knocked something over, but they didn't have a cat. Leanne got out of bed and crept to her bedroom door. She listened. She could hear movement downstairs. Someone was in her house. Leanne's heart started racing. Someone had broken in. Her children were asleep in their bedrooms down the hall. She had to protect them. Leanne grabbed her cell phone from her nightstand. She locked her bedroom door. She went into her bathroom, locked that door too, and called 911. She spoke in a whisper. "Someone broke into my house. I'm upstairs with my kids. Please send help. Please hurry." The 911 dispatcher told Leanne to stay in the bathroom with the door locked. Police were being dispatched. "Stay on the line. Stay quiet. They're coming." Leanne could hear footsteps downstairs. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs. Someone was coming upstairs. Leanne's breath was coming in short gasps. She was terrified. Her bedroom door rattled. Someone was trying to open it. Then there was a loud crash as someone kicked the door open. Leanne heard a man's voice. "Where are you? I know you're here." Heavy footsteps walked through her bedroom. Then the bathroom door rattled. "Open the door. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." Leanne didn't believe him. She stayed silent, holding her phone to her ear, praying the police would arrive. Then there was a massive crash as the man kicked in the bathroom door. The door frame splintered and the door flew open. Leanne screamed. She was trapped in her bathroom with nowhere to go. A man stood in the doorway. He was white, in his 30s, wearing dark clothes and a ski mask. He was holding a knife. "Shut up," the man said. "Shut up or I'll kill your kids." Leanne immediately went quiet. She'd do anything to protect her children. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't hurt my kids. Take whatever you want. Just please don't hurt my kids." The man grabbed Leanne by the arm and dragged her out of the bathroom. The 911 dispatcher could hear everything happening on the still connected call. The man forced Leanne downstairs to the kitchen. He demanded to know where the family kept their money and valuables. Leanne told him where her purse was, where Bobby kept his wallet, where the safe was. The man took everything: cash, credit cards, jewelry. He forced Leanne to give him the combination to the safe. Then he demanded she give him the PIN numbers for their ATM cards. While this was happening, Leanne's 10-year-old son woke up. He'd heard noises and came out of his room. He walked down the stairs and saw the man with his mother. The boy screamed. The man turned and saw the child. For a moment, everyone froze. Then the boy ran. He ran out the front door of the house in his pajamas. He ran to the neighbor's house and pounded on the door, screaming for help. The man panicked. The kid had escaped and would bring help. He grabbed what he'd already stolen and ran out the back door. He fled through the backyard into the woods behind the Barton house. Leanne collapsed on the kitchen floor sobbing. Her son had saved them both. If he hadn't woken up and escaped, who knows what the man would have done. Police arrived within minutes. They'd already been on the way because of the 911 call. And now they had the neighbor's call saying a child was saying his mother was being attacked. Officers secured Leanne and her children. They searched the house to make sure the intruder was gone. He was. They set up a perimeter and searched the surrounding area with K9 units and helicopters. But the man had vanished. The investigation revealed that the man had broken in through a window on the first floor. He'd been watching the house and knew the family. He'd known Bobby was traveling for work. He'd known Leanne was home alone with the kids. This wasn't a random home invasion. This man had targeted the Barton family specifically. Police interviewed neighbors and collected evidence. They found DNA at the crime scene from where the intruder had broken the window. That DNA was run through databases. It came back as a match to a man named Derek Williams, who was 34 years old and lived about 5 miles from the Barton house. Derek had a criminal record, including burglary and assault. Police went to Derek's address, but he wasn't home. They staked out the location. 2 days later, Derek Williams returned to his apartment and was arrested. In his apartment, police found jewelry and credit cards belonging to the Bartons. When questioned, Derek confessed to the break-in. He said he'd seen Leigh Ann around town and had become obsessed with her. He'd followed her home one day and learned where she lived. He'd watched the house and learned the family's routine. When he saw Bobby leave for a business trip, Derek decided to break in. He claimed he just wanted to rob them, but admitted he'd planned to rape Leigh Ann if he had the opportunity. Derek Williams was charged with burglary, robbery, attempted sexual assault, and terroristic threats. He pleaded guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Leigh Ann Barton never felt safe in that house again. The family moved to a different city. Leigh Ann required therapy for PTSD. Her son, who'd escaped and gotten help, also required therapy. The family had to rebuild their sense of security. Now, before we continue to the next story, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you think. Let's move on to our fourth story. This case takes us to rural Oklahoma in November 2015 and involves a woman named Kim Medlin. Kim was a 42-year-old woman who lived alone on a small property outside of Blanchard, Oklahoma. She'd recently gone through a divorce and was living by herself in a mobile home on 10 acres of land. Kim's nearest neighbor was about half a mile away. It was isolated and quiet, which Kim usually liked. But that isolation would become terrifying. Kim had an ex-boyfriend named Randy Stone, who she'd dated briefly after her divorce. The relationship hadn't worked out, and Kim had broken up with Randy about 6 months earlier. Randy hadn't taken the breakup well. He'd called and texted Kim repeatedly asking to get back together. Kim had been firm. It was over. She didn't want to see him anymore. Eventually, Randy had stopped contacting her, and Kim thought he'd moved on. On the evening of November 8th, 2015, Kim was home alone. She'd made dinner, watched some TV, and was getting ready for bed around 10 p.m. She changed into her pajamas and was brushing her teeth in her bathroom when she heard a noise outside. It sounded like a car door shutting. Kim looked out the bathroom window, but didn't see any vehicles in her driveway. Maybe she'd imagined it. Then Kim heard her front door open. She'd locked it. She always locked her doors living alone in a rural area. How was her door opening? Kim's blood ran cold. Someone had broken in. She grabbed her cell phone and locked herself in the bathroom. She called 911 and whispered that someone was in her house. The dispatcher said police were on the way, but it would take at least 15 minutes because of how far out Kim lived. Kim could hear footsteps in her mobile home. Then she heard a voice calling her name. Kim, Kim, I know you're here. Come out. I just want to talk. Kim's heart sank. She recognized the voice. It was Randy. Her ex-boyfriend had broken into her house. Randy, get out of my house, Kim yelled through the bathroom door. I've called the police. They're on the way. You need to leave now. Randy didn't leave. He came to the bathroom door and tried to open it. The door was locked. Randy started kicking the door. You can't hide from me, Kim. Open the door. We need to talk. Why won't you talk to me? I love you. We're meant to be together. Kim was crying. Randy, please leave. This is crazy. We're not getting back together. You need to go. The police are coming. Randy kicked the door harder. The flimsy mobile home door wasn't built to withstand much force. After a few kicks, the lock broke and the door flew open. Randy stood in the doorway. He was holding a gun. Kim screamed. "Oh my God, Randy, what are you doing? Please put the gun down, please." Randy was sweating, agitated. "You broke my heart, Kim. You threw me away like I was nothing. After everything I did for you, I loved you. I would have done anything for you. And you just ended it. You wouldn't even give me a chance." Kim tried to stay calm. "Randy, I'm sorry I hurt you, but this isn't the answer. You're going to get in serious trouble. The police are on their way. Please just leave and we can forget this happened." Randy shook his head. "No, if I can't have you, nobody can." He raised the gun and pointed it at Kim. At that moment, Kim heard sirens in the distance. The police were arriving. Randy heard them too. He turned toward the sound, distracted for just a second. Kim saw her chance. She had a can of hairspray on the counter next to her. She grabbed it and sprayed it directly in Randy's face. Randy yelled and stumbled backward, temporarily blinded. Kim pushed past him and ran for the front door. She burst out of her mobile home just as two police cruisers were pulling into her driveway. Officers jumped out with guns drawn. "He's inside, he has a gun," Kim screamed. She ran toward the officers who shielded her behind their vehicles. More officers arrived within minutes. They surrounded the mobile home and called for Randy to come out with his hands up. Randy didn't come out. For almost an hour, police negotiated with him through a megaphone. Finally, Randy opened the front door. He was holding the gun to his own head. "I'm not going to prison," he yelled. "You can't make me go to prison." Officers tried to talk him down. Trained negotiators told Randy to drop the gun, that they could work this out, that he didn't want to do this. Randy stood there for several minutes, the gun pressed to his temple, crying and talking about how Kim had ruined his life. Then Randy lowered the gun. He dropped it on the ground and put his hands up. Officers rushed in and tackled him, cuffing him immediately. Randy was arrested and charged with burglary, kidnapping, terroristic threatening, and weapons charges. He was denied bail and held pending trial. At trial, Randy pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Kim Medlin was shaken by the experience, but physically unharmed. She got a restraining order against Randy that would remain in effect after his release from prison. She also sold her mobile home and moved to an apartment in Oklahoma City, where she felt safer being around more people. The isolation that she'd once enjoyed in the country now felt dangerous. She couldn't live alone in a rural area anymore, knowing how vulnerable she'd been. Let's continue with our fifth story. This takes us to Memphis, Tennessee, in August 2016, and involves a nurse named Jessica Chambers. Actually, I need to correct that. This story is about Lauren Mitchell, a 28-year-old woman who lived alone in an apartment in downtown Memphis. Lauren worked as a paralegal at a law firm and had a routine life. She'd go to work, come home, cook dinner, watch TV, go to bed. She was single and enjoyed her independence. On August 23rd, 2016, Lauren came home from work around 6 p.m. She changed out of her work clothes into comfortable clothes and made herself dinner. She ate while watching Netflix. Around 9 p.m., she decided to take a shower before bed. She grabbed her phone to bring into the bathroom so she could listen to music while showering. Lauren was in the shower when she thought she heard a noise from elsewhere in her apartment. She turned off the water and listened. Nothing. She resumed her shower. A few minutes later, the bathroom door opened. Lauren screamed. A man was standing in her bathroom. He'd been hiding in her apartment. He'd broken in somehow earlier and had been waiting for her to come home. The man grabbed Lauren and pulled her out of the shower. She was naked, wet, completely vulnerable. Lauren fought back, scratching at his face, trying to get away. The man hit her, stunning her. He dragged her out of the bathroom into her bedroom. He threw her on the bed and tied her hands with duct tape he'd brought with him. Lauren was crying, begging him not to hurt her. "Please, take whatever you want. I won't call the police. Just please don't hurt me." The man didn't say anything. He taped her mouth shut so she couldn't scream. Then he went through her apartment methodically. He took her laptop, her jewelry, cash she had in a drawer. He went through her purse and took her wallet and credit cards. Lauren lay on her bed, bound and naked, terrified of what he was going to do to her. After ransacking the apartment, the man came back to the bedroom. He stood over Lauren, staring at her. Lauren was shaking uncontrollably. Was he going to rape her? Kill her? The man pulled out a knife. Lauren's eyes went wide with terror. But instead of attacking her, the man cut the phone line in her bedroom. Then he left. He walked out of the apartment with Lauren's belongings, leaving her tied up on the bed. Lauren waited until she was sure he was gone. Then she worked on getting the duct tape off her wrists. It took about 20 minutes, but she finally got one hand free. She removed the tape from her mouth and her other wrist. She grabbed her cell phone, which thankfully the intruder hadn't taken because it had been in the bathroom. She called 911. Police arrived and took a report. Lauren described the intruder as a white man in his 30s with brown hair. She said he'd been hiding in her apartment when she got home, that she had no idea how long he'd been there or how he got in. She said he'd tied her up and robbed her, but hadn't sexually assaulted her, though she'd been terrified he was going to. Officers processed the apartment for evidence. They found how the intruder had gotten in. He'd picked the lock on Lauren's front door. The lock was old and easy to pick. He'd entered while Lauren was at work and had hidden in her closet, waiting for her to come home. This meant he'd been in her apartment for hours before revealing himself. The DNA evidence collected from the scene was run through databases. It matched a man named Eric Harmon who had a long criminal record, including burglary and robbery. Police went to Eric's known address, but he'd already fled. An arrest warrant was issued. Eric was eventually caught 2 weeks later in Little Rock, Arkansas. He had Lauren's laptop and some of her jewelry in his possession. Eric Harmon was extradited back to Tennessee and charged with burglary, robbery, and kidnapping. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Lauren never felt safe in that apartment again. She broke her lease and moved to a different building with better security. She also started seeing a therapist to deal with the trauma of having someone hiding in her apartment, of being attacked while showering, of being tied up and left vulnerable. The violation of her personal space and safety was profound. Now, let's move to our sixth and final story. This takes us to a small town in Pennsylvania in March 2018 and involves a teenage girl named Sarah Patterson. Sarah was 16 years old and lived with her parents and younger brother in a house outside of Harrisburg. On March 10th, 2018, Sarah's parents and brother went to visit relatives about 2 hours away. Sarah had stayed home because she had a big test at school on Monday and wanted to study. Her parents said they'd be back late Sunday night. Saturday evening, Sarah was home alone studying. She'd ordered a pizza for dinner and was working on her homework at the kitchen table. Around 8 p.m., Sarah heard a knock at the door. She looked through the peephole and saw a man in a delivery uniform holding a package. Sarah thought maybe it was something her parents had ordered. She opened the door with the chain still on. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man said he had a package that required a signature. Sarah thought this was odd since she hadn't heard the doorbell ring before or seen a delivery truck, but she opened the chain to sign for the package. As soon as the chain was off, the man forced his way into the house. He wasn't a delivery person. He pushed Sarah backward into the house. Sarah screamed. The man covered her mouth with his hand. "Shut up and you won't get hurt," he said. Sarah was terrified. The man forced her to sit down on the couch. He had a gun in his waistband. He told Sarah he just wanted money and valuables. If she cooperated, he'd leave and nobody would get hurt. Sarah believed him. She told him where her parents kept cash in their bedroom. She told him where her mother kept her jewelry. The man went upstairs and returned with a bag full of valuables. But then the man decided he wanted more. He forced Sarah to call her parents. "Tell them you're sick and ask them for the PIN to their credit card so you can go to the pharmacy," he instructed. Sarah called her mother with shaking hands. She tried to act normal on the phone. "Mom, I'm not feeling well. I need to go to CVS. What's the PIN for the credit card?" Sarah's mother, not suspecting anything was wrong, gave her the PIN. Sarah thanked her and hung up. The man now had the PIN number for the credit cards he'd stolen. The man forced Sarah to come with him to ATMs around town. He drove Sarah in her parents' car, which he'd found keys to. At each ATM, he made Sarah withdraw the maximum amount of cash using her parents' cards. They went to 4 different ATMs and got about $2,000 total. During this time, Sarah was looking for opportunities to escape or signal for help, but the man kept the gun visible and watched her constantly. After the ATM withdrawals, the man drove Sarah back to her house. Sarah thought maybe he was going to leave now that he had money. But when they got inside, the man told Sarah to sit back down on the couch. He tied her hands behind her back with rope. Sarah started crying. "Please, you got what you wanted. Please, just go." The man was pacing, agitated. He seemed to be debating what to do. Sarah realized he was thinking about whether to kill her to eliminate the witness. Sarah tried to talk to him. She asked him his name. She tried to humanize herself, to make him see her as a person, not just a victim. She told him she wouldn't tell police what he looked like, that she'd say he wore a mask. She begged him to just leave. The man seemed conflicted. He kept pacing and muttering to himself. Then Sarah's cell phone rang. It was sitting on the kitchen counter. The man went over and looked at it. It was Sarah's mother calling. The man told Sarah to answer it and act normal, or he'd kill her whole family. He put the phone on speaker and held it up to Sarah's face while standing behind her with the gun. Sarah answered. "Hey, Mom." Her mother said they were on their way home and would be there in about 30 minutes. Did Sarah need anything? Sarah's mind raced. This was her chance. She had to warn her parents not to come home. "Actually, Mom, I'm going over to Ashley's house for a little bit, so I won't be home when you get there." There was a pause. Sarah's mother knew Sarah didn't have a friend named Ashley. Something was wrong. "Okay, honey," her mother said carefully. "When will you be back from Ashley's?" Sarah said, "Probably pretty late. You might be asleep when I get home." Her mother said okay, and they hung up. Sarah's mother immediately called 911. She told them she'd just had a strange conversation with her daughter, and she believed Sarah was in trouble, possibly being held by someone. She explained the fake friend name and the odd conversation. Police said they'd send someone to check on Sarah. Back at the house, the man hadn't realized Sarah had sent a signal to her mother. He seemed to relax, thinking he had more time before the parents came home. He told Sarah he was going to leave. He was going to take her with him, though, at least for a while until he could get far enough away. Sarah's heart sank. If he took her, she might never be found. Before the man could follow through on this plan, police arrived. Multiple cars pulled up to the house. Officers surrounded the building. The man realized what was happening. He grabbed Sarah and held the gun to her head. "I'll kill her," he yelled when officers entered the house. Sarah was crying. Officers tried to negotiate with the man. They told him to let Sarah go, that this didn't have to end badly, that he could still walk away from this. After a tense standoff that lasted almost an hour, the man finally gave up. He was surrounded, had no escape, and realized he wasn't going to get away. He released Sarah and dropped the gun. Officers rushed in and arrested him while other officers got Sarah to safety. She was physically okay, but completely traumatized. The man was identified as Robert Stevens, a 38-year-old with a long criminal history. He was charged with kidnapping, robbery, burglary, and multiple weapons charges. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Sarah's quick thinking using the fake friend name had saved her life. Her mother's instinct that something was wrong had led to police being sent to the house. If either of those things hadn't happened, Robert might have taken Sarah, and the outcome could have been much worse. Sarah had to deal with the trauma of being held at gunpoint in her own home for hours. She had nightmares for months. She was scared to be home alone. Her parents felt guilty for leaving her by herself, even though there was no way they could have predicted this would happen. The family got a security system installed, and Sarah never stayed home alone again until she went to college. These 6 home alone horror stories show how being by yourself at home can turn terrifying in an instant. The Pettit family attacked during a home invasion that ended in murder. The Wichita Friends held hostage and executed. Lee Ann Barton, whose son saved her by running for help. Kim Medlin, confronted by an ex-boyfriend with a gun. Lauren Mitchell, attacked in her shower by someone hiding in her apartment. Sarah Patterson, held hostage by a fake delivery person. All of these people thought they were safe in their homes. They thought being home was the safest place to be. But they learned that nowhere is completely safe. Thank you for watching. If you found this content compelling, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.